Before we dive in too far, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and like this video, and if you enjoy it, go ahead and follow that up by hitting the subscribe button. While you're there, go ahead and hit the bell, that way you know when I drop new stuff. Now, given we have new consoles just around the corner, I thought it'd be fun to stop and take a look at some of the titles that made the consoles we love and know today. Starting off first, we're going to go ahead and visit the Xbox and see some of the franchises that deserve a return for a new generation. This is the top 10 Xbox franchises that deserve a reboot. Coming in at number 10 is ReCore. This is a title that was released in 2016 and followed a character by the name of Jewel and her host of robot companions. The gameplay was that of a third-person shooter with combat and puzzle elements, all of which that involved the use of her companions. She would use different modes on her weapon to inflict more damage on her foes, and her extractor to pull cores from them that she could use to modify those robot companions to help her navigate terrain and solve various puzzles. This is a newer franchise and one of the very few IPs that came out this generation. It was actually met with kind of mixed results, however, and mostly left on the shelf after the first installment. The concepts and idea behind the game I feel make it worth exploring further, and hopefully this time they would make the gameplay less repetitive and more engaging. I just feel like there's too much promise in this IP not to explore it further than this coming generation. Number 9. Killer Instinct. Yeah, I know, it's another entry that's had one this generation, but it doesn't excuse an entire generation that got skipped by this franchise, and the fact that it hasn't seen any new updates or entries in it for years now. Couple that with the resurgence of fighting games in the last year to year and a half, and you have an excellent candidate for the newer hardware that's just the thing to pull in fighting games. This game was a perfect example of how to retool a franchise on the Xbox One, and in my opinion is a true console seller in its own right to anyone who's a fan of fighting games. Between the core mechanics being tight, animations being fluid and visually appealing, all the way to each fire having unique mechanics just for that character, you could lose hours and hours learning the nuances of this fighter and still only scratch the surface, only to learn you know nothing as you launch into online play. Microsoft could do worse than to push an exclusive fighting franchise on their shiny new hardware. Besides, whether their fighting game has General Ram and the Arbiter as usable characters. Throw in Master Chief and Michael Phoenix and you have almost every iconic character from Microsoft in one game. Number 8. Project Gotham Racing. Now we go back a bit. Let's take a look at Project Gotham Racing. This series has really not seen an entry since it went mobile on the Zune in 2009. Yeah, thought you'd never hear about the Zune again, right? This series was well known for its tight arcade-style racing and amazingly rendered cars. The fact that it rewarded the player for flashy driving with kudos points to unlock and upgrade your cars was just icing on the cake. It had hours and hours of fun racing through the streets in cars way too fast to ever handle the roads at those speeds, laughing and cracking up the style points all the way. I know this series has mostly had its gap filled with Forza Horizons and Grid, but another racing franchise I think could be welcome among racing fans and might even start drawing more people like me who normally don't get into racing games into the genre, making it a perfect candidate for this coming generation. Number 7. Brute Force. Man, was this one hype back in the day. Touted as a team-based shooter with each character in the team having unique skills and ways of approaching combat, it looked like we were going to have a spiritual successor to Republic Commando on our hands. With Tex the heavy assault trooper, Hawk the scout, Brutus the shock trooper, and Flint your sniper, you had the makings of an interesting tactical shooter that could leave you with any number of approaches to a situation. Unfortunately, the combat was less than stellar, making very little use of any of the unique abilities each one of these brought to bear. The story needed some work as well, being a generic new enemy force is invading the known galaxy, find and destroy. But with a colorful cast and lack of squad shooters outside the military ones on the market, it would make an interesting sci-fi addition to this genre. I think it deserves a chance to be revisited and done right this time. Coming in at number 6 is Blue Dragon. With a story penned by the original creator of Final Fantasy, I'm sure Microsoft thought this was going to knock it out of the park for them in Japan, which is a market they've always traditionally struggled with. This was a JRPG style game with a fantastic art style, but was heavily criticized for having lackluster facial animations and sticking too hard to the traditional JRPG format, that it was mostly considered generic. However, I think with a more Final Fantasy remake version of this game, you could return to it and turn it into something interesting and special. It's a type of title that could drive sales to the console very quickly, drawing a hardcore RPG crowd in the Japanese market as well, bringing a level of game diversity to the platform that it's lacked in a lot of ways since the 360 days. Number 5. Voodoo Vents. This one came to mind due to its quirky nature and hilarious tagline of "Feel His Pain." It was a 3D platformer where you control a voodoo doll named Vents, who was brought to life by zombie dust and must save his master and recover her lost zombie dust. The gameplay was filled with various different punches and kicks, along with special voodoo powers that Vents could use to aid him in killing enemies in combat. The atmosphere was very New Orleans inspired, with a very colorful and diverse amount of enemies and set pieces. Even though the original got a remaster in 2017, I feel that this is the kind of title that could help Microsoft show itself a player in the platforming section and compete among the likes of Ratchet & Clank. It would also give them another identifiable mascot outside of Master Chief and Marcus Phoenix. Number 4. Viva Pinata. Without a doubt, this is the most quirky and strange game on this list. There really just aren't words to describe this game, but I'll try. Viva Pinata is a game where you run a farm raising pinatas, filling them with so much candy and happiness that you have to launch them via cannon to waiting children's homes. This is a game made by Rare. It's a bit of a farming simulator where you raise and breed pinatas, making certain types to lure others, so on and so forth. It's delightfully cute and brimming with personality, and you can lose hours, even days, in your little farm. I spent hours and hours myself working on my small plot of land and sending out various pinatas and fighting with my girlfriend, or now wife, over the controller as to who gets to play next. It's one of those deceptive games where you stop and think, that was fun, only to realize you lost 5+ hours and hardly noticed. It had 2 sequels, a second game for the 360 and another release on the DS before fading largely into obscurity. It's also the kind of title to pull in the more casual Stardew, Harvest Moon / Rune Factory crowd onto the system, I feel like. Number 3. Crimson Skies. This was one of my favorite games on the original Xbox. You play as a sky pirate in an alternate timeline where the United States has collapsed around the year 1937. The roads and railways aren't really as usable as they were, and the main form of travel now is via plane. The gameplay would have you fighting other rival pirates and defending your ground transports, or even attacking shipments for other factions. With a varied amount of airplane designs, it had influences from the 1920s and 1930s in both experimental and real airplane designs. The game had a unique look and feel to it as a result that I've never seen before or since. This made it a fantastic arcade flight simulator, the likes of which I really haven't seen its likes of again. This could very easily turn plenty of heads with a modern graphical update and new storyline, driving people in droves to see what all the fuss is about. Number 2. Cameo. This one dates way back to the early launch of the Xbox 360. You follow the main hero Cameo as she goes about her quest to save the 10 elemental warriors and defeat the Troll King. Each one of the elemental warriors would give Cameo new abilities and powers useful for not only combat, but essential for navigating the world itself, allowing her to traverse to areas she could not go before, or letting her progress in the stage at hand. The stages were bright and fun to explore, while the combat was simple and sometimes a little clunky with some of the elements, being hard to use in combat. That said, the premise had a ton of promise, and I think more could be done with the IP, while bringing Rare back to its roots that it's known for game-wise. And also would give them another title that's more kid-friendly and yet another memorable mascot for people to hold up next to Sony. Coming in at number 1 is Perfect Dark. While not one of the most well-reviewed games, this is a unique shooter specific to the Xbox 360 that followed Joan Dark, a bounty hunter, in the year 2020. She joins the Keratin Institute to prevent a rival corporation from obtaining a relic that endows individuals with superhuman powers. It had a very female James Bond quality about it, and while it was at the times a bit clunky to control, it had a ton of personality and a very identifiable lead. This could make for a great change of pace from the Gears and Halo gameplay that we all know and love. Well, that's it for this list. I hope you enjoyed it, and yes, I know most of these games showed up on the Rare Replay bundle for the Xbox One, but that's not the same as exploring these universes and expanding on them. Are there any I missed? What are some of your favorites? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, happy gaming.